Welcome to my slideshow from my 2002-2003 trip to Taiwan and the Philippines. This trip began by flying into Taipei, Taiwan, where I quickly left my bag at a hostel and set out on foot. My first destination was Memorial Hall, a monument erected in the mid-70s after the death of former Taiwanese President Chiang Kai-shek. During my visit, I got to see the changing of the guards that happens once every hour. After leaving Memorial Hall, I continued my walk through the city, where I was amazed by all the sights, the sounds, and the vast number of motor scooters. After a few days in Taipei, I decided I wanted to see more parts of Taiwan. What parts? I didn't know. So I went to the train station and asked for a ticket on the very next train leaving. Wherever it ended up going, I was going to be there. Turned out it's Kaohsiung. When I arrived in Kaohsiung, I noticed on my map there were some shipping channels that go out to some islands in the China Sea. I decided to try and make my way down to the dock on foot and then hopefully onto a boat. Just getting to the dock was a little troublesome for me. I kept getting turned around, ended up going down some weird alleys. I guess I looked suspicious enough because the cops stopped and asked what I was doing. They were kind enough, took me to the ferry terminal, where I met these guys. They invited me in for a cup of tea and told me to show up tomorrow morning at 8 and that they would get me on a boat. I think they thought I was important because I showed up with the cops or something. Later that night I was poking around some of the back alleys looking for a good place to sleep when I met this guy. We ended up going out to get a bite to eat and to exchange travel stories, and he gave me a good tip on a place to stay. He told me about a jetty down by the harbor that had a lighthouse at the end. He said it should be a good place to spend the night, so I did. It was good too until the rain came in early morning, but that wasn't all bad. It woke me up on time so I could get on a boat headed out to the islands. As the boat was pulling out of port, I got to see some of the Taiwanese Navy vessels that had been parked there, and I also got to see the lighthouse that I spent the night at. Once the sun broke through the clouds, I crawled up on the top deck to dry out a bit. The boat took about 5 or 6 hours till we got to the islands. Once I got to the islands, I decided to rent a little scooter so I could get around to some of the other parts of the islands not so frequently visited. Exploring the islands was a lot of fun, but the weather didn't hold out very long. The next morning when I woke up, it was raining. I found myself down by the dock in a phone booth waiting for the next boat to come. When I realized, there's an airport on the island, why didn't I just fly back to Taipei? It only took me 45 minutes to get back to Taipei instead of the day and a half a train and a boat would have taken me. That night I got to meet up with some friends I had made on the internet. They were kind enough to show me around for the next few days. They took me to good places to eat. They showed me the Jade Market. And I was even invited into their home to have dinner with their family, which was really cool. Staying in hostels, you meet a lot of really interesting people. On this trip, I met Suguri. She was traveling down to Hualien in a few days to check out the Terraco Gorge and invited me to come. The first day we got there, we rented some bikes to pedal around the city and check it out. The second day we were there, we got on a bus and headed up into the gorge. The gorge itself is amazing. It's made largely out of marble, but the road was spectacular. They chiseled it out of the side of the gorge. Every so often, the road would enter a wider portion of the gorge in which waterfalls, temples, and pagodas were found. After visiting the gorge, I caught another flight back to Taipei, where I met up with my friends again. On my last few days in Taipei, I decided to explore some of the area around the city. I found hot springs, a number of parks, and a very beautiful waterfront walkway. The evening of my last day in Taiwan, I watched construction on Taipei 101. At the time, it was to be the world's tallest building. The next day, I flew out of Taipei, headed down to Manila, so that I could get a ride on one of these, a jeepney. Jeepneys came about after World War II when the U.S. sold or gave away many of their Jeeps to the Filipinos. The Jeeps were later modified for public transportation and to look pretty swanky. I was in Manila on New Year's Eve, so I went out walking on the streets to see what people were up to. I found fireworks for sale, family and street parties, and the Syndicate, or so I am told. They tried to take off with my stuff, but I was able to wrestle most of it back. That evening I crawled out of a window to get on the roof of the hotel to watch fireworks. I'd found some of the hotel staff did the same thing. Unfortunately, the only fireworks we saw were this. I think it was an emergency flare gun someone shot off. The next morning I decided to check out a couple places before I flew home. I first went to Lanetta Park where I spent the early afternoon, and then I headed over to Fort Santiago, which dates back to 1571 and has been a part of many historical events in the region. And that's the end of my slideshow. I hope you've enjoyed it.